The gun was already against Valentina's temple when she heard the key turn in the front door. She'd been in worse situations, held at knife point in Bogota, nearly drowned in the canals of Venice, shot twice in Prague, but this moment, frozen in the marble foyer of the Castellano mansion with a silenced Beretta pressed against her skull, felt different. Because this time, the man who could save her was also the man whose secrets could destroy them both. "Don't move," the assassin whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "Don't even breathe." Through the frosted glass panels of the front door, she could see his silhouette.
Dante Castellano.
6'3" of controlled violence wrapped in a $5,000 suit. The most powerful mafia boss in the northeastern United States. Her employer of 3 months. And the only man who'd ever made her heart beat faster than fear could manage. He wasn't supposed to be home until midnight. The intelligence had been solid. A meeting with the 5 families at the restaurant in Brooklyn, then drinks with the Russians, back by 12:30 at the earliest. That's what she'd told them. That's what she'd staked her life on. She'd been wrong. The key scraped in the lock. The door began to open. And Valentina did the only thing that might save them both. "Stay quiet," she said, her voice steady despite the gun at her head, her eyes locked on the doorway. "Mr. Castellano, stay exactly where you are." The door stopped moving. Through the gap, she could see one dark eye, sharp as a blade, taking in the scene. Understanding flooded across his features, the professional assessment of a man who'd survived 2 decades in a business where survival was the exception, not the rule. Then something else crossed his face. Something that looked almost like fear. But not for himself. For her. "How many?" His voice was low, controlled, deadly. "One behind me," Valentina replied, still not moving, her hands held carefully away from her body. "2 in the kitchen. 1 upstairs in your bedroom. Maybe more I didn't catch." The assassin's gun pressed harder against her temple. "Shut up. Shut up or I'll—" "You'll what?" Valentina interrupted, and now her voice carried something else, something cold and precise that made the man behind her hesitate. "You'll kill the only leverage you have?" "I don't think so. Because the moment you pull that trigger, Dante Castellano will paint these walls with your blood, and you know it." 3 months. She'd been the Castellano family's live-in maid for exactly 3 months. 12 weeks of ironing shirts and polishing silver and pretending to be invisible while she cataloged every detail of Dante's operation. The meeting schedules, the money routes, the names of every captain, soldier, and associate in his organization. Information that would have bought her freedom from the people who owned her, who'd trained her, who'd sent her into this gilded cage to spy and report and wait for the perfect moment to strike. But somewhere between the perfectly pressed sheets and the midnight conversations when he'd found her in the library, unable to sleep, reading Dante's collection of first edition Camus in the original French, something had shifted, tilted, cracked open in her chest like an egg revealing something fragile and impossibly dangerous underneath. She'd started to care. No, worse than that. She'd started to feel. And when her handlers had activated her night, when they'd send the kill team to eliminate Dante Castellano and tie up all the loose ends, including her, she'd made a choice that would either save them or damn them both. Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments. And if you want to see how this story ends, hit that subscribe button right now because what happens next will change everything. Dante's eye was still visible through the gap in the door. She could see him calculating, running scenarios, measuring distances and angles. She'd watched him work often enough, had seen the way his mind moved like a chess engine, always 3 moves ahead, always finding the pattern in the chaos. "The one in my bedroom," he said quietly. "Window or closet?" "Closet. Left side. Waiting for you to undress." A slight nod. Then, the 2 in the kitchen. Armed with what? Glocks with suppressors. Standard hollow points. They're expecting you to go there first. Glass of scotch, late night snack. Your routine. And you were going to let them kill me? Something flickered in his eye, not accusation, but curiosity.
Testing.
"No," Valentina said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I was going to stop them. That's why this one has a gun to my head. I pulled the fire alarm in the panic room. I triggered the silent alert to your security team. I did everything I could to warn you, and now they know I betrayed them." The assassin's voice was tight with rage. "You stupid bitch. You just signed your own death warrant." "I signed it the day I was born," Valentina replied. "At least this time, I get to choose who holds the pen." She'd been raised for this. Trained from childhood by an organization that had no name, only a reputation. Ghosts who moved through the underworld collecting secrets and selling them to the highest bidder. They taught her 17 languages, 33 ways to kill a man with her bare hands, and exactly 0 ways to be human. Until the night she'd found her crying over a cheap paperback romance novel at 2 in the morning, and instead of mocking her or dismissing her or treating her like the hired help, he'd sat down across from her in that enormous library and asked her what the book was about. Had listened while she'd talked about love and loss and the peculiar pain of wanting something you could never have. Had looked at her like she mattered. "Your security team," the assassin said, pressing the gun so hard against her skull that she could feel the metal bruising bone. "When do they arrive?" 18 minutes, Valentina lied smoothly. "Dante has the best in the business. Former CIA, Mossad, Russian FSB. They'll come in through every entrance simultaneously. You won't hear them until they're on top of you." It was actually 35 minutes. But he didn't need to know that. Through the door gap, she saw Dante's eye narrow slightly. He knew she was lying. He knew his security response time to the penny. And now he understood she was buying them time, giving him information, helping him find the angle. "Here's what's going to happen," the assassin said. "You're going to tell Castellano to come inside slowly, hands visible, no weapons. He's going to walk into the living room where my team can see him. And then we're going to have a conversation about all the money he's stolen from the Bratva, all the territories he's muscled in on, all the disrespect he's shown to people who deserve his fear." "The Russians," Dante said from behind the door. "I should have known." "You should have paid," the assassin corrected. "You should have bent the knee. You should have remembered that in this business, pride is expensive and you can't afford the price." Valentina felt something shift in the air, a subtle change in pressure, a whisper of movement. Someone was coming down the stairs. The fourth assassin from the bedroom, probably wondering what was taking so long. She had maybe 30 seconds before this became a bloodbath. "Dante," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "The Camus. Remember what we talked about? Page 117. For a heartbeat, nothing." Then the faintest ghost of a smile touched his visible eye. Because page 117 of The Stranger was where Massault fired the gun. Where everything changed. Where the quiet man became a killer. And Dante Castellano understood exactly what she was telling him. "I remember," he said. Then everything exploded into violence. The door slammed open with enough force to crack the frame. Dante came through low and fast, a .45 caliber automatic appearing in his hand like magic, already firing. One shot that caught the assassin behind Valentina's square in the forehead before his finger could even tighten on the trigger. She was moving before the body hit the ground, dropping into a roll, coming up with the dead man's Beretta in her hands, spinning toward the kitchen where she could hear shocked voices and scrambling movement. 2 shots. 2 bodies. Both dropping before they could return fire, because she'd been trained by people who didn't believe in second chances, and muscle memory was a language more fluent than words. Upstairs, footsteps thundered. The fourth killer, coming down fast, rifle probably raised, ready to spray the whole foyer with automatic fire. Dante was already moving toward the stairs, but Valentina was faster. She sprinted across the marble floor, planted one foot on the newel post, and launched herself up and around the corner just as the killer appeared at the top of the landing. He was big, professional, already firing. But she was smaller, quicker, and absolutely certain she was going to die protecting the one thing in her life that had ever mattered. The bullet meant for her chest caught her shoulder instead, spinning her around, painting the cream-colored wall with arterial spray. But her return shot was true, straight through his throat, severing the carotid, dropping him in a gurgling heap at the top of the stairs. Then silence. Terrible, ringing silence broken only by her ragged breathing and the wet sound of blood dripping onto imported Italian tile. Valentina. Dante's voice. Close. She turned and found him standing 3 feet away, gun still raised, eyes scanning for threats. There might be more, she said, pressing her hand against the bullet wound. I only counted 4, but they could have brought backup, could have. There were only 4. He was moving toward her now, holstering his weapon, his hands reaching for her shoulder with surprising gentleness. I've had counter-surveillance on this house for 6 weeks. Ever since I realized my beautiful maid was fluent in Russian, spoke Italian with a Sicilian accent, and could quote Sartre like she'd studied existential philosophy at the Sorbonne. She blinked. You knew. I knew you weren't what you pretended to be. His fingers were probing the wound now, clinical and efficient.
Graze.
You'll live. But you saved my life tonight, so I think we're overdue for an honest conversation. Your security team are 14 minutes out, which gives you exactly enough time to tell me the truth. His eyes locked on hers, dark, intense, reading her like a book she'd never learned to close. Who are you really?
Who sent you?
And why in God's name did you just burn your entire operation to save a man you were supposed to destroy? In the distance, sirens. Getting closer. His people probably coming to clean up the mess. To disappear the bodies. To make this night vanish like it had never happened. Valentina looked at the man she'd been sent to betray, at the blood on both their hands, at the impossible choice she'd made in a single frozen moment when everything hung in the balance. And she told him the truth. Because, she said simply, some cages are worth breaking. And some people are worth dying for. But she wasn't dead. Not yet. And the night was far from over. The safe house was in Queens, buried in a neighborhood where people knew better than to ask questions, and surveillance cameras had a habit of mysteriously malfunctioning. Dante drove them there in a black Mercedes that looked ordinary enough from the outside but was armored like a tank and probably cost more than most people's houses. Valentina sat in the passenger seat, her shoulder bandaged with supplies from the go bag Dante always kept in the trunk. Field dressing, antibiotics, pain medication that was probably prescription only and definitely illegal. The bullet had indeed been a graze, tearing through muscle, but missing bone and major vessels. She'd been lucky. Or maybe she'd been trained well enough that even luck looked like skill. Talk, Dante said, eyes on the road, voice neutral. Start from the beginning.
So she did.
My name isn't Valentina Morales, she began. It's Imani Webb. I was born in Newark, New Jersey, to a single mother who died of an overdose when I was 7. No father on the birth certificate. No family willing to take me. I went into the system, foster care, group homes, the whole ugly cycle. She watched the city slide past the window, lights and shadows, life happening in windows and doorways, normal people living normal lives. Something she'd never had and never would. When I was 11, I ran away from my 4th placement. Made it 3 days on the streets before a man found me sleeping in a subway station. He bought me food, asked me questions, told me I was smart and special and wasted in the system. Said he knew a place where kids like me could learn skills, could become someone important. A recruiter, Dante said quietly. The organization doesn't call them that. They call them talent scouts. She laughed, but it was bitter. Like I was an athlete or a child star instead of a desperate kid who would have followed anyone who promised her a meal and a bed. The memory was clear even now. 20 years later, she could still taste the McDonald's hamburger the scout had bought her, still feel the warmth of the car as he'd driven her upstate to the facility. Still remember the moment when she'd realized the doors locked from the outside and the windows didn't open and the other children moved with the wary precision of soldiers instead of kids. They trained us, she continued. Languages, combat, intelligence gathering, infiltration. How to be invisible. How to read people. How to become whoever we needed to be to complete the mission. Some of us were sold to private military contractors. Some to intelligence agencies. Some to organizations like yours, criminal networks that needed inside information. And you were sent to me. 3 months ago. The contract was simple: infiltrate your household staff, document your operation, and wait for activation. When the order came, I was supposed to disable your security system and leave the front door unlocked. Let the kill team in. Let them do their work, and then disappear with enough money to finally buy my freedom. Dante was quiet for a long moment, navigating through traffic with the easy confidence of a man who owned the city. Finally, but you didn't.
No, I didn't.
Why? That was the question, wasn't it? The one she'd been asking herself for weeks as she felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack, as her mission objectives started to blur under the weight of something she'd never expected to feel. You treated me like a person, she said simply. Not a servant. Not a tool. Not a means to an end. You learned my name or the name I gave you, and you used it. You asked me questions about the books I read, and the music I listened to, and what I thought about the world. You made me coffee when I was tired. You thanked me for my work. She trailed off, struggling to articulate something that felt too large and too fragile to put into words. You saw me, she finished quietly. In 29 years of life, you were the first person who ever really looked at me and saw a human being worth knowing. The Mercedes pulled into an underground parking garage, descending 3 levels below street level before Dante parked in a spot marked with a number that probably meant something to his organization. He killed the engine but didn't move to get out. I'm a killer, Imani, he said, using her real name for the first time, and something about hearing it in his voice made her chest ache. I've done things that would make most people sick. I've hurt people, destroyed families, built an empire on blood and fear. You know that, right? You've seen it. I know what you are, she replied. I also know you paid for Rosa Martinez's daughter's cancer treatment when her husband, one of your soldiers, got killed in that warehouse shooting. I know you personally visited the family, handed Rosa an envelope with $50,000 cash, and told her it was her husband's pension. I know you shut down 3 of your own drug operations because kids were getting caught in the crossfire. I know you have rules about who gets hurt and who doesn't, and you enforce those rules with violence when necessary because that's the only language your world understands. She turned to face him fully. I know you're not a good man by conventional standards, but you're better than you think you are, and you're certainly better than the people who sent me to kill you. Dante's jaw tightened. The Bratva. The Russian mob has been trying to muscle in on my operations for 2 years. I've been pushing back, refusing to pay tribute, refusing to acknowledge their authority in my territories. I knew they'd retaliate eventually, but I didn't expect them to contract it out, Imani finished. The organization specializes in exactly this kind of work. We're ghosts. Deniable. If the hit succeeds, the Bratva gets what they want with no blowback. If it fails, then 4 dead contractors and a rogue operative tell no tales. He shook his head. They would have killed you too. After. To tie up loose ends. I know. That was always part of the deal. Freedom was never really on the table, just a cleaner death than some of the alternatives. The pain medication was starting to wear off, and her shoulder was throbbing in time with her heartbeat. But that was good. Pain meant alive. Pain meant she'd made the right choice, even if that choice came with consequences she couldn't yet imagine. What happens now? She asked. To me, I mean, you know what I am. You know I was sent to betray you. You have every right to what?
Kill you.
Dante's laugh was short and sharp. You just took a bullet saving my life. You betrayed your handlers, burned your entire organization, and painted a target on your own back to keep me breathing. Whatever debt you might have owed for the attempted infiltration, I'd say you've paid it in full. He reached out then, his hand cupping her uninjured shoulder with surprising gentleness. Besides, he continued, his voice dropping to something quieter, more intimate, I meant what I said earlier. I've known for weeks that you weren't who you claimed to be. And I didn't say anything because I was curious. Because I wanted to see what you'd do. Because every time we talked, every midnight conversation in the library, every moment you thought I wasn't watching, I saw someone extraordinary trying very hard to hide behind a mask. And you wanted to see if I'd crack, Imani said. If I'd choose the mission or choose. Choose life, Dante finished. Choose yourself. Choose something other than what you were programmed to do. His thumb traced a small circle on her shoulder. I was raised in this world, Imani. Born into the family, groomed from childhood to take over the organization. I never had a choice about who I became. But tonight, you had a choice. And you chose mercy. You chose humanity. That's worth something. That's worth everything. The moment stretched between them, charged with something that was part gratitude, part recognition, part something else entirely. Something that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch, and her carefully controlled survival instincts scream warnings about vulnerability and exposure, and all the ways that caring about someone could get you killed. But she'd already chosen, already burned her bridges, and salted the earth behind her. There was no going back now. The organization will come for me, she said. They don't tolerate betrayal. They'll send cleaners, specialists, people who make the team tonight look like amateurs. And they won't stop until I'm dead. Then we'll kill them first, said with such casual certainty that it should have been terrifying. But first, we need to deal with the immediate problem. Which is, the Bratva thinks I'm dead. Or at least, they will once they realize their kill team hasn't reported back. That gives us maybe 12 hours before they figure out something went wrong and send people to investigate. 12 hours to turn this from a disaster into an opportunity. Imani felt her tactical mind engaging, the old training clicking into place like muscle memory. You want to use me? I want to work with you, Dante corrected. You have insider knowledge of how the organization operates. I have resources and reach they can't match. Together, we can do what neither of us could do alone, survive. It was insane.
Impossible.
The kind of plan that only worked in movies or fever dreams. But it was also the only play they had. What did you have in mind? She asked. Dante's smile was sharp as a knife and twice as dangerous. How would you feel about a little dramatic irony? Because I think it's time the Bratva learned that Dante Castellano is significantly harder to kill than they anticipated. And that betraying him comes with consequences that make death look merciful. He climbed out of the car, came around to her side, opened the door with old-world courtesy that would have been charming if they weren't both covered in blood and plotting revenge against an international criminal organization. Come on, he said, offering his hand. We've got work to do. And I promise you this, whatever happens next, whatever we have to do to survive this, you won't face it alone. Not anymore. Imani took his hand, let him help her out of the car, felt the solid strength of him beside her as they walked toward the elevator that would take them up to the safe house. 3 months ago, she'd entered his world as a lie wearing a maid's uniform. Now she was walking into an uncertain future as herself, broken and dangerous and finally, impossibly, free. But freedom, she was learning, came with a price. And the bill was about to come due. Would you have made the same choice Imani did? When everything you've known demands one thing, but your heart screams for another. Which voice do you listen to? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you think because this story is about to get even more complicated. The safe house was elegant in its simplicity, 3 rooms, minimal furniture, weapons cached in every wall and false floor, completely off the grid. Dante led her to the bathroom where a proper first aid kit waited, and with clinical efficiency that spoke of too much practice, he cleaned and rebandaged her shoulder wound. You've done this before, Imani observed, watching his steady hands work. More times than I can count. Violence is the price of power in my world. You learn field medicine the same way you learn to shoot, through necessity and repetition. When he finished, he stepped back, studying her with those dark, penetrating eyes. You should rest. The antibiotics will make you drowsy, and you've lost blood. We can start planning in the morning. But Imani shook her head.
No.
If we only have 12 hours, I'm not wasting them sleeping. Tell me the plan, Dante. Tell me how we turn this disaster into something we can survive.
So he did.
And as he outlined his strategy, brutal and brilliant and absolutely insane, Imani realized that she'd done more than just save a life tonight. She'd started a war. And wars, in their world, only ended one way. With bodies or with victory. She was determined it would be the latter. The Russians found the bodies at dawn. Imani watched through the scope of a rifle from a rooftop 3 blocks away as the black SUVs pulled up to the Castellano mansion, as men in expensive suits and cheaper violence climbed out and disappeared through the front door that Dante had left conveniently unlocked. She counted them, 8 total, which meant the Bratva was taking this seriously, but not serious enough. They'd sent a cleanup crew, not an army. That was their first mistake. Beside her, Dante spoke quietly into a secure phone, issuing orders to his people with the calm efficiency of a general moving pieces on a chessboard. Wait until they're all inside. I want a complete count before we make our move. And someone get me a direct line to Volkov. I have a message to deliver. Alexei Volkov, head of the Russian Bratva's American operations. The man who'd ordered tonight's hit, who'd contracted the organization to eliminate Dante, who'd miscalculated so badly that his mistake was about to cost him everything. Imani adjusted the scope, tracking movement through the mansion's windows. She could see them discovering the bodies, could see the moment when confusion turned to alarm, could practically hear the frantic phone calls being made. They're panicking, she said, trying to figure out what went wrong.
Good.
Let them panic. Fear is the crack that lets doubt seep in. Dante lowered the phone. Volkov will be here in 20 minutes. He can't afford not to come. If word gets out that he botched an assassination this badly, his own people will smell weakness. And in our world, weakness is blood in the water. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and absolutely ruthless in its execution. Dante wasn't going to hide, wasn't going to run. Instead, he was going to do the last thing the Bratva expected. He was going to invite them to a meeting, going to sit across from Volkov and explain, in very clear terms, what happened when people tried to kill Dante Castellano in his own home. And Imani was going to be his proof, his evidence. The ghost who chose loyalty over contract, the impossible variable that had shattered their perfect plan. "You're sure about this?" she asked, still watching through the scope. "Once we show them I'm alive, once they realize the organization failed, there's no walking this back. I stopped walking back the moment I opened my front door and saw you with a gun to your head." Dante's voice was firm, certain. "We're all in now, Imani. Both of us. And that means we play this the only way that ends with us breathing. We go on offense." 18 minutes later, a convoy of vehicles arrived, this time more impressive, more dangerous. Armored sedans flanked by SUVs full of soldiers, the whole procession moving with the coordinated precision of a military operation. Alexei Volkov climbed out of the center vehicle, and even from 3 blocks away, Imani could read the fury in his body language. He was a big man, 6'4" and built like a boxer, with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. The kind of man who'd built his reputation on violence and enforced it with calculated brutality. Dante's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then smiled, cold and predatory. "Mr. Volkov, thank you for coming on such short notice. I believe we have some things to discuss." "Yes, I'm aware you sent people to kill me. That's actually why I wanted to meet." "No, I'm not at the mansion.
I'm somewhere safer.
Somewhere I can talk without worrying about guns and poor manners. The address is 1247 Riverside Drive, Warehouse 3. Come alone, or bring your whole crew. It makes no difference to me. But if you want answers about what happened tonight, you'll be here in 30 minutes. He ended the call. "They'll come." "How can you be sure?" "Because Volkov is a professional, and professionals hate mysteries. Right now, he has 4 dead contractors and no idea what went wrong. That uncertainty is eating him alive. He'll come, because he needs to know what he's dealing with." They packed up the surveillance equipment, climbed down from the rooftop, and drove across the city to the warehouse, where Dante had been slowly building his empire for 15 years. It was an unassuming building from the outside, corrugated metal and broken windows and graffiti that warned away curious teenagers. Inside, it was something else entirely. A throne room, an arsenal, a testament to power carefully accumulated and jealously guarded. Dante led her through security that would have impressed military installations, biometric scanners, pressure plates, cameras that tracked their every move. Men and women appeared from doorways and corners, soldiers in his organization, each one armed and dangerous and absolutely loyal. Boss, one of them, a woman with sharp features and sharper eyes named Lucia, nodded as they passed. The perimeter is secured. Motion sensors are active. The package is ready in conference room 2.
Good.
Imani, you'll wait in the observation room. Stay out of sight until I call for you. But Imani shook her head.
No.
I should be there from the start. Volkov needs to see that your dead maid is very much alive, that his operation failed at every level. He'll try to kill you the moment he sees you. Let him try. She touched the Beretta holstered under her jacket, Dante's spare, given to her that morning with a box of ammunition and quiet instruction to shoot anyone who threatened either of them. I didn't survive 29 years by being easy to kill. Something flickered in Dante's expression, pride, maybe, or recognition.
All right.
But stay close to me. If this goes wrong, I want you where I can protect you. The words should have bristled her independence, should have triggered all her training about self-reliance and never depending on others. Instead, they settled warm in her chest like a promise, like partnership, like something that might grow into love if they survived long enough to let it. Volkov arrived exactly on time, which told Imani everything she needed to know about his professionalism. He came with 10 men, enough to signal strength, but not so many that it looked like fear. They filed into the warehouse like an invading army, weapons visible but not raised, every face a mask of controlled aggression. Dante met them in the center of the main floor, standing alone under industrial lights that cast harsh shadows across his features. He looked every inch the boss, tailored suit, perfect posture, hands loose at his sides in the stance of a man who didn't need weapons to be dangerous. Mr. Volkov, he said, voice carrying easily across the space. Thank you for accepting my invitation. You have some nerve, Castellano. Volkov's accent was thick Russian, each word clipped and precise. I send men to your home, and they disappear. I send more men to investigate, and they find bodies. Then you call me, acting like we're friends meeting for coffee instead of enemies preparing for war. Are we enemies? Dante tilted his head slightly. I thought we were businessmen having a territorial dispute, but maybe I misunderstood. Maybe when you contracted the organization to assassinate me in my own home, that was your way of proposing partnership. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut, and Volkov's jaw tightened. You refused to pay tribute. Refused to acknowledge our authority in territories we've controlled for 5 years. You gave me no choice. There's always a choice. Dante's voice dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. You chose escalation, violence, assassination, and I'm here to explain why that was a mistake. 4 dead contractors is not a mistake, it's an inconvenience. The organization will send more, better trained, better prepared. And next time, there will be no warning, no mercy, no. The organization won't send anyone. Imani stepped out of the shadows behind Dante, and the effect was electric. Volkov's eyes widened. His hand moved toward his gun. His men shifted, weapons rising. The entire room suddenly balanced on a knife edge of potential violence.
Impossible, Volkov prêted. You're dead.
The operative was scheduled for termination after the mission completion. You should be a corpse? Imani walked forward until she stood beside Dante, letting Volkov see her clearly. The bandaged shoulder, the gun at her hip, the absolute certainty in her eyes. I was supposed to be. But plans change when you realize you're working for the wrong side. You betrayed the organization. Not a question. An accusation heavy with implications.
It chose survival over suicide.
Seems like an easy choice when you actually think about it. Volkov's face was a fascinating study in conflicting emotions, rage and calculation, confusion and dawning horror. Because if the organization's operative had flipped, if she'd chosen to help Dante instead of killing him, that meant everything Volkov thought he knew about the situation was wrong. How much did she tell you? He asked Dante. About our operations? About our plans? Everything. Dante's smile was cold. meeting locations, supply routes, names of every captain in your organization, bank accounts, safe houses, shipment schedules. She was very thorough in her intelligence gathering, just pointed the gun in a different direction than you expected. This was the moment, the pivot point. Volkov had two choices: back down and accept that he'd lost this round, or escalate into open war right here in this warehouse. Either way, the balance of power had shifted. Imani watched him calculate, saw the moment when survival instinct overrode ego. "What do you want?" Volkov asked finally. "Territory stays as it is.
No tribute.
No interference with my operations. And in exchange, I forget about tonight's unpleasantness and we go back to being neighbors who stay on our respective sides of the fence." "That's not enough.
You humiliated me, killed my contractors,
Made me look weak in front of my own people. Then let's give you a win to take home." Dante gestured, and one of his soldiers stepped forward with a metal briefcase. "There's an Irish crew working the docks, the Murphy Syndicate. They've been skimming from your shipments for 6 months. Here's everything you need to shut them down permanently. Schedules, warehouse locations, names of corrupt dock workers. Consider it a peace offering." Volkov stared at the briefcase like it might contain a bomb. Then slowly he reached for it, opened it, scanned the documents inside. His expression shifted from suspicion to interest to something almost like satisfaction. "The Murphys have been a problem," he admitted. "This information is valuable. Consider it rent," Dante said, "for the privilege of both of us continuing to breathe and make money. Because here's the truth, Volkov. We can keep trying to kill each other, keep bleeding resources and soldiers in a war nobody wins. Or we can be smart. Carve up this city like professionals and focus on our real enemies instead of each other." The Russian looked at Imani, then back at Dante. "The organization will come for her. And when they do, they'll come for you too. Protection of their operative makes you a target. Let them come." Dante replied, voice like iron. "I've survived worse than ghost assassins and corporate cleaners. And besides..." He glanced at Imani, something warm flickering in his cold expression. "Sometimes the most dangerous weapon is the one that chooses its own target." The meeting ended with a handshake, tentative, loaded with mutual distrust, but a beginning nonetheless. Volkov and his men filed out of the warehouse, taking the briefcase and leaving behind an uneasy peace that might last a month or a year, or until someone's ambition overcame their sense. When they were alone, Dante turned to Imani. "That was reckless. Stepping out like that, revealing yourself. He could have opened fire. But he didn't, because you'd already won. The information, the evidence, the sheer audacity of inviting him here. You'd already beaten him before I said a word. I just made it personal. Made him see that his perfect plan failed because someone chose humanity over programming." Dante was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Then, when this started, when I realized you were more than you seemed, I thought I was playing a game. Testing you. Seeing what you'd do. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being a game." "What is it now?" Imani asked, though she thought she knew the answer, could feel it in the electricity between them, in the way he looked at her like she was something precious and dangerous all at once. "Now it's survival," he said. "Yours and mine. Together. Because I meant what I said. You don't face this alone anymore." He closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. "The organization will come. They'll send their best. And we'll have to be ready to fight a war on 2 fronts, the Bratva watching for weakness, and ghosts coming for revenge." "I know." She leaned into his touch, letting herself have this moment of vulnerability, of connection. "But I'm not afraid. For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of what comes next." "Why not?" "Because I'm not fighting alone anymore. Because someone finally gave me a reason to want tomorrow." He kissed her then, fierce and claiming and filled with all the words neither of them knew how to say. And in that moment, with danger closing in from every side and an uncertain future stretching before them, Imani felt something she'd never experienced before.
Hope.
But hope in their world was a fragile thing. And the organization had very long reach, very sharp teeth, and absolutely no mercy for those who broke their chains. The war was just beginning. The message arrived 3 days later, delivered by a courier who walked into Dante's restaurant at noon, placed a single black envelope on the bar, and walked out without saying a word. No cameras caught his face. No witnesses remembered his features. He was a ghost delivering a ghost's warning. Inside the envelope, a photograph and 3 words. The photograph showed Imani as a child, maybe 9 years old, standing in front of the facility where the organization trained its assets. Her face was bruised, her eyes empty, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. A reminder of what she'd been, what they'd made her. The 3 words were handwritten in elegant script. "We own you." Imani stared at the message, and something cold and familiar settled in her chest. Fear, yes, but also recognition. Because the organization wasn't making an idle threat, they were stating a fact. In their eyes, she was property, a tool that had malfunctioned. And tools got repaired, reprogrammed, or destroyed. "They know where I am," she said quietly, standing in Dante's office with a photograph trembling slightly in her hands. "They've been watching. Probably since the night of the hit. They're just letting me know they're coming." Dante took the photograph, studied it with the same cold assessment he brought to every problem. The courier. "Did anyone get a description?" "Your people tried." He was forgettable on purpose, medium height, medium build, nondescript features. Probably wearing a mask underneath makeup. The organization trains its people to be invisible. "Like they trained you." "Like they trained me," she agreed. "Which means I know how they think. How they operate. They'll send a scout first, someone to assess my security, identify weaknesses, map out Dante's operation. Then they'll send the real team.
Specialists.
The kind of people who don't fail." "How long do we have?" "A week, maybe 2. They're patient. They'll want perfect intelligence before they move. We'll wait for the ideal moment when we're vulnerable. Then we don't give them that moment." Dante set the photograph down, his expression hardening into something Imani recognized from her intelligence gathering, the face of a man preparing for war. "We go to ground. Move to a secondary location, somewhere they can't have scouted yet. And we start hunting them before they can hunt us." It was a good plan. A smart plan. Exactly what Imani would have recommended if she were still operating with the cold tactical logic of her training. But something else nagged at her, something the photograph had awakened. An old wound never quite healed. "There's another option," she said slowly. "A worse option, but one that might actually end this." "Tell me." The organization operates on fear and control. They train children, break them down, rebuild them into tools. But they have a weakness. They're bureaucratic. Hierarchical. Everything flows through a central command structure, a council of 3 handlers who make all major decisions. Dante leaned forward, understanding beginning to dawn. "You want to go after the handlers themselves. I want to burn the entire operation to the ground." The words came out with more vehemence than she'd intended, carrying 29 years of buried rage. Not just survive. Not just escape. Actually destroy the people who've been enslaving children and selling them as assassins for profit. That's suicide. You said yourself they're ghosts. Protected by layers of security and deniability. I also said, I know how they think. Imani paced to the window, looking out over the city, her cage for 3 months, now her battleground. I was one of their success stories. Top operative, perfect completion rate, never questioned orders. Which means they trusted me with information most assets never see. Meeting protocols. Fail-safes. The locations of emergency dead drops where high-value intelligence gets stored. She turned back to Dante. The handlers change identities constantly, but the dead drops are permanent. Physical locations that can't be moved without compromising decades of operations. If we can access one of those drops, we can find out who the handlers are, where they operate from, how to hit them where they live. And then, Then we make them pay. For every child they've stolen. Every life they've destroyed. Every person they've turned into a weapon. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I'm not running anymore, Dante. I spent my whole life running from foster care, from the streets, from the organization's training, from myself. I'm done. Either we end this, or they end us. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication, with consequence. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice, about revenge, about two people damaged by different machines deciding to break the machines instead of each other. Finally, Dante nodded.
All right.
We do it your way, but we do it smart. We bring in my best people. We plan every step, and we make damn sure that when we come for them, we don't miss. I wouldn't expect anything less. The next 72 hours were a blur of preparation and planning. Dante called in specialists from across his organization, a digital forensics expert who could crack encrypted files, a former CIA operative who'd worked black sites, a demolition specialist who could make buildings disappear, and Lucia, his second-in-command, who coordinated everything with terrifying efficiency. They set up in a warehouse Dante owned under 6 layers of shell companies, a space that didn't officially exist on any map or deed. The walls filled with maps and photographs and intelligence reports as they dissected everything Imani knew about the organization's operations. The dead drop was in Philadelphia, hidden inside a medical supply warehouse that had been operating continuously since 1987. Imani had only accessed it once, years ago, but the protocol was burned into her memory, the specific sequence of movements, the codes, the fail-safes designed to kill anyone who approached incorrectly. It's suicide, Lucia said, studying the layout. The warehouse has overlapping security zones, motion sensors, pressure plates, probably biometric locks that'll trigger if the wrong person tries to access the drop. And that's assuming the organization hasn't changed protocols since you left. They haven't, Imani said with certainty. Changing dead drop protocols would mean alerting every active asset, which creates exposure. They value security over adaptation. It's their weakness. Then we exploit it, Dante said. Imani goes in alone. She's the only one who knows the exact sequence. The rest of us provide overwatch, intervention if things go wrong, and extraction if the organization responds. When they respond, Imani corrected, the moment I access that drop, alarms will trip somewhere. They'll know someone's compromising their security. They'll send people.
Good.
Let them come. Dante's smile was predatory. I've got a dozen shooters who'll be very interested in meeting the people who've been hunting us. They flew to Philadelphia in a private jet that carried no manifest and filed no flight plan. By midnight, they were positioned around the medical supply warehouse. Dante and 4 soldiers in a building across the street, Lucia and the digital expert in a van 2 blocks away, and Imani, alone, approaching the warehouse's back in trance with nothing but her training and a prayer that her memory hadn't failed. The door was rusted metal, covered in graffiti and warnings about private property. But underneath the decay, Imani could see the telltales. Reinforced hinges, a lock that was far too sophisticated for its surroundings, security that whispered of something valuable hidden behind ordinary facades. She knocked 3 times, paused 5 seconds, knocked twice more. The sequence she'd learned 9 years ago, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought might falter. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then a click. A whir of machinery. The door sliding open on hydraulics that made no sound. Inside was darkness, and the smell of old paper and machine oil. Imani stepped through, heard the door seal behind her, felt the security systems analyzing her, scanning for weapons, for electronic devices, for anything that might compromise the location. She'd left everything behind. No gun. No phone.
No white.
Just herself and the knowledge embedded in her bones. Lights flickered on, dim, barely enough to see by. The interior was exactly as she remembered, rows of medical supplies creating a maze, and in the center, hidden behind boxes of gauze and 4 bags, a floor safe built into concrete. The combination was her birthday, ironically. The organization had a sick sense of humor, locking their secrets behind the personal information of the children they'd stolen. Imani spun the dial, feeling each tumbler fall into place, and heard the satisfying thunk of bolts retracting. Inside, 3 hard drives, a ledger, and a photograph that made her blood freeze. It was recent, taken within the last month. It showed Dante leaving his restaurant, unaware of the camera, and written on the back, in that same elegant script, subject, Dante Castellano. Status, secondary target. Eliminate with extreme prejudice once primary asset is recovered. They'd never intended to just kill her. They'd been planning to kill Dante too, to erase every connection she'd made, to punish her for the crime of choosing herself over servitude. Fury burned through her veins like acid. She grabbed the hard drives, stuffed them into the bag she'd brought, was reaching for the ledger when she heard it, a sound so faint it was almost imaginary. A whisper of fabric on concrete. The ghost of a breath. She wasn't alone. "Hello, Imani." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, processed through speakers hidden in the walls. "We've been expecting you. Although I must admit, I'm disappointed. Breaking into a dead drop? Attempting to steal classified information? This is beneath you. You were one of our best." Imani stood slowly, hands away from her body, trying to locate the speaker. "I was one of your victims. There's a difference." Victims. Bitter laughter echoed through the space. "Is that what you tell yourself? That we're the villains and you're the hero? Tell me, how many people have you killed for us, Imani? 20? 50? More?" 73, she said quietly. "I remember every name, every face, every moment. I became the monster you trained me to be. And now you want redemption? Forgiveness? You think stealing our files and playing house with a mafia boss will wash away that blood?"
No.
But it's a start. More sounds, multiple sources now, converging on her position. They'd been waiting, watching. This had been a trap from the beginning, and she'd walked right into it. But so had they. "Dante," she said, knowing her partner would be listening through the microscopic transmitter embedded in her tooth, the one piece of tech she'd kept, hidden from the security scanners.
Now.
3 things happened simultaneously. Lucia's team cut the power to the entire block, plunging everything into darkness. Dante's soldiers breached the front entrance with shaped charges that turned security doors into shrapnel. And Imani, who'd spent 20 years training to fight in the dark, moved. She dropped low, rolled right, felt bullets tear through the space where she'd been standing. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. 3 shooters, professional spacing, exactly where her training predicted they'd be. She came up with a combat knife she'd hidden inside her boot, drove it into the first shooter's throat before he could adjust his aim. Took his gun as he fell, put 2 rounds into the second shooter's center mass, was spinning toward the third when the lights came back on, emergency generators kicking in, revealing the chaos. Dante was through the door with his team, weapons raised, covering every angle. The third shooter, a woman Imani recognized from training, someone called Phantom 7, had a gun pointed at Dante's head. "Move and he dies," Phantom 7 said calmly. "Drop the hard drives, Imani. Walk away. We'll consider tonight's transgression a learning experience and move on." "No, you won't," Imani replied, still holding the stolen weapon. "You'll kill us both. You don't negotiate. You don't forgive. You only destroy."
True.
"But I'm offering you a choice. Die together right now, or live separate lives and die later. Which sounds better?" The moment balanced on a razor's edge. But Dante, because he understood violence like breathing, didn't hesitate. He moved fast as thought, dropping and rolling while simultaneously drawing a backup pistol from an ankle holster. Phantom 7's shot went wide. Dante's shot didn't. The woman fell, blood spreading across the concrete, her eyes wide with surprise that someone had actually beaten her to the draw. In the sudden silence, Dante looked at Imani. "You all right? I've been better. But yes." She held up the bag with the hard drives. "And we got what we came for. Then let's go. I'm betting they have backup coming, and I'd rather not be here when they arrive." They ran, through the warehouse, past the bodies, out into the Philadelphia night where Lucia waited with engines running and questions in her eyes. The van peeled away from the curb, merged with traffic, became just another vehicle in a city full of them. Behind them, sirens. Police responding to reports of gunfire. But by the time they arrived, there would be nothing to find. Dante's cleanup team was already moving in, disappearing evidence, turning crime scene into mystery. In the back of the van, Imani opened the bag and pulled out the first hard drive. This is it. Everything we need to destroy them. Account numbers, identities, locations, the organization's entire infrastructure. And that photograph, Dante said quietly, looking at the image of himself. They were always planning to kill me. Which means we strike first. We take this information, we find the handlers, and we end them. She looked at him, this man who'd seen her as human when everyone else saw a weapon. Are you sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no going back. The organization has connections everywhere, law enforcement, intelligence agencies, governments. They'll come at us with everything. Dante's answer was to take her hand, lace their fingers together, and squeeze gently. I survived in my world by being ruthless, when necessary, and loyal always. You've earned my loyalty, Imani. So yes, I'm sure. We end this. Together. The van carried them through the night, toward an uncertain future and a war that would test everything they were. But for the first time since childhood, Imani wasn't facing the darkness alone. And that made all the difference. The hard drives contained 27 years of the organization's operations. Names, dates, locations, financial records, everything needed to dismantle the entire network. But what caught Imani's attention, what made her breath stop and her hands shake, was a single file buried deep in the encrypted directories. Project Redemption. Final Phase Protocols. She opened it on the laptop in Dante's safe house, her stomach churning with premonition. And as she read, the full scope of the organization's plans became horrifyingly clear. They weren't just training assassins. They were building an army. Over 300 children, spread across facilities in 12 countries, all being conditioned, trained, prepared for a coordinated operation that would destabilize governments, eliminate targets across 6 continents, and create enough chaos that their clients, whoever they were, could reshape the global power structure. And Phase 1 was scheduled to begin in 72 hours. This is impossible, Lucia breathed, reading over Imani's shoulder. 300 simultaneous hits? That's not an operation. That's a war. It's exactly what they've been building toward. Imani scrolled through the target list, seeing names she recognized, politicians, business leaders, journalists, activists. They're not just killing people. They're eliminating everyone who might oppose whatever's coming next. Dante was on the phone in the corner, speaking rapidly in Italian to contacts across his network. When he hung up, his face was grim. I've been making calls. Checking with people who would know if something this big was moving. And I'm hearing whispers, weapons shipments that don't make sense, mercenaries being recruited for unknown operations, money moving through channels that usually stay dormant. The organization is activating, Imani said. And we have 3 days to stop them.
How?
Lucia's voice was sharp. Even if we warn law enforcement, what do we tell them? That 300 child assassins are about to murder global leaders? They'll think we're insane. Then we don't warn law enforcement, Dante said. We go to the source, the handlers. We find them, we eliminate them, and we shut down the operation before it begins. Imani pulled up another file, the one containing information on the handlers themselves. 3 individuals known only by code names: architect, physician, and teacher. Between them, they controlled every aspect of the organization's operations. Architect handles logistics and planning, she explained. Every operation, every detail, every contingency. Physician manages the conditioning and training, the psychological programming that makes us into weapons. And teacher is the face we see. The one who recruited us, who convinced us this was normal, who made us believe we had no choice. Do we have their real identities? Dante asked. Better than that. We have their locations. She clicked through the files, pulling up surveillance photos, property records, travel manifests. They're meeting in 72 hours. The day before Phase 1 begins. A final coordination session to ensure everything goes smoothly. Where? A private estate in upstate New York. 200 acres of forest, a single access road, security that would make Fort Knox jealous.
She looked at Dante.
It's a fortress. But it's also our only chance. If we can get to them before the meeting ends, before they disperse to oversee the operation, we can decapitate the entire organization. The plan they built over the next day and a half was part military operation, part suicide mission, and part desperate gamble. Dante called in every favor he'd accumulated over 15 years in organized crime: weapons dealers, helicopter pilots, demolitions experts, soldiers who'd follow orders even if those orders seemed insane. They assembled a team of 18, including Imani and Dante. Not enough to storm a fortress by conventional means, but possibly enough if they were smart, fast, and ruthlessly efficient. The estate had weak points, every fortress did. Service entrances, power substations, gaps in security coverage during shift changes. Imani knew them because she'd been to this location once before, 7 years ago, for what the organization called advanced conditioning. 2 weeks in isolated cabins, subjected to scenarios designed to break down the last vestiges of humanity and rebuild them as pure instruments of violence. She remembered every tree, every pathway, every corner where trauma had been inflicted with clinical precision. Now she was going to burn it all down. They moved at midnight, flying in through a gap in radar coverage that shouldn't have existed, but did because Lucia's technical expert had done something brilliant with satellite feeds and electromagnetic interference. The helicopter dropped them a mile from the estate, and they covered the distance on foot, moving through forest with the quiet efficiency of hunting wolves. Imani led the way, following memory and instinct. Behind her, Dante and his soldiers moved like shadows, weapons ready, every sense alert for the ambush that had to be coming, because nothing was ever this easy. It came at the outer perimeter, guards in ghillie suits, nearly invisible, opening fire from concealed positions. But Dante's team was ready. They'd expected resistance, had planned for it, and moved through the chaos with the coordinated precision of professionals. For guards down, the alarm was raised. Now it was a race. Get to the main house before the handlers could escape, before reinforcements could lock down the estate, before their window of opportunity slammed shut forever. They breached the security fence with bolt cutters, crossed an open field under covering fire, reached the house just as interior lights began flicking on. Shaped charges took out the doors. Flashbangs turned organized defense into confusion. And then they were inside, moving room to room, hunting 3 people who'd destroyed hundreds of lives. Imani found Teacher first. He was in a study, calmly loading a pistol like he'd been expecting this. When he saw her, he smiled, the same warm, paternal smile she remembered from childhood, the expression that had convinced a traumatized 11-year-old that slavery was love. "Imani," he said gently, "I knew you'd come eventually. You were always too curious, too independent. We should have broken that in you, but physicians said you were more valuable with some autonomy intact." "Where are the others?" she demanded, weapon raised but not firing yet because she needed information more than revenge.
"Gone."
The moment we heard shooting, architect and physician evacuated through the underground tunnels. "It's just me now. Just the man who raised you, trained you, made you into the weapon you are today. You didn't raise me. You programmed me. There's a difference." "Is there?" Teacher gestured at the gun in her hands. "You're here to kill me. To stop Phase 1. To destroy everything we've built. How is that different from any other mission I've given you? You're still following programming, Imani. Still letting others decide what's right and what's wrong. Still a tool in someone else's hands." The words cut because they contained a sliver of truth. Was she here by choice? Or was she just following a different master's orders? Had she actually broken free? Or had she just traded one cage for another? "The difference," Dante said from the doorway, his own weapon trained on Teacher, "is that this time, she chose. Nobody ordered her to come here. Nobody gave her mission parameters. She decided, of her own free will, that some things are worth fighting for. Ah, the boyfriend. Teacher's smile widened. Tell me, Mr. Castellano, what exactly do you think you've saved? A broken woman with 73 murders on her conscience? A weapon that occasionally exhibits human characteristics? You can't save Imani because there's nothing to save. We took that little girl and we made her into pure function. Everything else is just programming deep enough to look like personality. You're wrong, Imani said quietly. Because if I were just programming, I would have killed Dante the night you activated me. I would have followed orders without question, without hesitation. But I didn't.
Il chose differently.
And that choice, that single moment of actual free will, means you failed. You didn't make me into a weapon. You made me into a person who learned to fight. She fired twice. Center mass. Clean kills. Teacher fell without another word, his smile finally faltering as blood spread across expensive carpet.
No satisfaction. No catharsis.
Just the grim knowledge that one monster was dead, but two more remained free. The tunnels, Dante said. Where do they lead? Imani was already moving, racing toward the basement, following half-remembered layouts. The tunnel entrance was behind a wine rack. Of course it was. The organization loved their melodrama. She hit the mechanism, heard gears grinding, watched stones swing away to reveal darkness and the echo of running footsteps. They plunged into the tunnel, the pursuit becoming a desperate chase through underground passages that twisted like intestines through the earth. Behind them, she could hear Lucia coordinating the team, securing the estate, gathering evidence. But ahead, two people who'd orchestrated decades of child slavery were escaping into the night. The tunnel opened into a garage 2 miles from the main house. Architect and physician were climbing into a black SUV when Imani and Dante burst through the exit. They fired, bullets sparking off armored plating, and the SUV roared to life. We need to follow them, Imani said, looking around desperately. If they get away, they'll disappear. Phase 1 will still happen. 300 children will still be activated. But Dante was already moving toward another vehicle, a motorcycle that probably belonged to estate security. He kick-started it, held out a hand to Imani. Then let's not let them get away. They raced through back roads, the SUV ahead weaving through forest paths with practiced skill. Whoever was driving knew this terrain, had planned escape routes, was trying to reach a highway where speed and anonymity could save them. Imani fired from the back of the motorcycle, aiming for tires, trying to disable rather than destroy because she needed them alive, needed the codes that would shut down Phase 1, needed proof that would stop 300 child soldiers from being activated. The SUV swerved, crashed through a wooden barrier, plunged down an embankment toward a river that gleamed silver in the moonlight. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and then the vehicle was in the water, sinking fast. Dante braked hard. Imani was off the motorcycle before it stopped, sprinting toward the riverbank, diving into cold water that stole her breath and burned her lungs. She could see them through the windshield. Architect struggling with his seatbelt, physician already unconscious from the impact. She got the door open, dragged them both out, pulled them to shore where Dante was waiting with zip ties and weapons and questions that needed answers immediately. The codes, she gasped, water streaming from her clothes. For Phase 1, the activation sequences. Give them to me now, or I put you back in the river and let you drown. Architect, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and the calm demeanor of an accountant, laughed. You think it's that simple? That there's some kill switch you can throw? Phase 1 is already in motion. The moment we sent the activation signal yesterday, 300 assets began moving toward their targets. You can't stop them all. You can barely stop yourself. Then we find them one by one, Dante said coldly. Starting with this list. He held up a printout from the hard drives, names, locations, target assignments. We contact law enforcement in every jurisdiction. We warn the targets. We do everything possible to prevent this massacre. You'll fail, physician said, a woman with ice-blue eyes and a voice like honey over razors. Our children are too well trained, too committed, too convinced that what they're doing is right and necessary. You can't deprogram 300 people in 72 hours. No, Imani agreed. But I can try. Because I was one of those children once. And if someone had tried to reach me, if someone had shown me there was a choice, maybe I would have chosen differently. Maybe 73 people would still be alive. She looked at Dante, at the man who'd given her that choice, who'd seen her as human when everyone else saw a weapon.
We split up, she said.
You take half the list, I take half. We go to every location, every asset. We give them the same choice you gave me. And we hope that enough of them choose humanity over programming. It was impossible. Insane. They'd never reach everyone in time, never prevent every assassination, never save every target. But impossibility had stopped being a barrier the moment Imani chose to save Dante instead of kill him. Sometimes the only way to change the world was to refuse to accept what the world said was possible. Over the next 72 hours, they worked miracles through exhaustion and desperation. Dante mobilized his entire organization, soldiers fanning out across the country, contacting law enforcement, warning targets, creating enough chaos that Phase 1's careful coordination began to fracture. Imani went to the assets themselves, the children, now adults, who'd been trained like her. She found them in safe houses and staging areas, in the final hours before they were supposed to strike. And she told them her story, told them about choice, about freedom, about the possibility that they could be more than weapons. Some listened, some didn't. Some chose violence, and she had to fight people who moved like her, thought like her, had survived the same hell she'd survived. Those were the hardest fights, not because they were difficult, but because she saw herself in every face, remembered being that certain, that committed, that broken. But others chose differently. Others looked at her, this woman who'd somehow broken free, who'd found something worth living for beyond missions and programming, and decided that maybe, possibly, they could do the same. By the time Phase 1's deadline arrived, enough of the network had collapsed that the operation failed. Not completely, 7 targets died, 7 assassinations succeeded where they couldn't prevent them. But 300 became 7. A massacre became a tragedy. And the organization's grand plan shattered against the simple fact that even the most thoroughly programmed humans still retained some capacity for choice. In the aftermath, with law enforcement descending on the organization's facilities, with media coverage exploding, with survivors beginning to come forward, Imani stood on the balcony of Dante's safe house and watched the sun rise. Behind her, she heard footsteps, felt arms wrap around her waist, pull her back against solid warmth. It's not over, Dante said quietly. Architect and physician are in custody, but there are probably others. Cells we didn't find. Assets we couldn't reach. The organization had roots 30 years deep. Pulling them all out will take time. I know. Imani leaned into him, letting herself have this moment of peace before the next fight began. But we started something. Those of us who survived, who chose freedom, we can help others make the same choice. Build a network of former assets, create support systems, give people the tools they need to deprogram themselves. Redemption through action, Dante mused. I like it. Very Italian of you, atone for past sins by fighting present evil. She turned in his arms, looked up at this man who'd changed her trajectory, who'd given her something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. What about you? She asked. You've committed crimes too. Built your empire on blood and violence. Are you looking for redemption? I've never believed in redemption, he admitted. Just in being slightly less terrible than the day before. But if you're asking whether I regret meeting you, whether I regret choosing to see you as human instead of threat. He kissed her forehead gently. Not for a single second. You've made me want to be better. That's worth more than absolution. They stood there as sunrise painted the sky gold and pink and orange, 2 broken people who'd found each other in the darkness and decided that maybe, together, they could face the light. The organization would recover eventually. There would be other fights, other threats, other moments when survival seemed impossible. But they'd face those moments the same way they'd faced everything else, together, with clear eyes and steady hands and the absolute certainty that some cages were worth breaking, no matter the cost. And in the meantime, they had work to do. Children to save. Lives to rebuild. A better future to fight for. The sun rose higher, and with it, hope. 3 months later, Imani stood in front of a room full of survivors. 43 former assets, ranging in age from 20 to 35, all recruited from the wreckage of the organization's collapsed network. They sat in folding chairs in an anonymous conference room, their faces carrying the same wariness Imani remembered from her own mirror, the look of people who'd been taught that trust was weakness and vulnerability was death. "My name is Imani Webb," she began, and saying her real name still felt like rebellion. "I was recruited into the organization when I was 11 years old. For 18 years, I did what they told me to do, killed who they told me to kill, and never once questioned whether there might be another way to live." She paused, making eye contact with as many people as she could. Some met her gaze. Others stared at the floor. All of them were listening with the intensity of people desperate for answers. 3 months ago, I made a choice that changed everything. I was activated for an assassination mission. Kill a target in his home. Simple operation, standard parameters. But when the moment came, when I had to choose between completing the mission or saving a life, I chose differently than my programming dictated. She told them the story then, all of it. The hit that went wrong. The fight in the mansion. The decision to warn Dante instead of kill him. The brutal aftermath when the organization came for her and she fought back with everything she had. "I'm not going to tell you it was easy," she said, or that making the choice to break free solved all my problems. The truth is, I still wake up at 3 in the morning with nightmares. I still catch myself automatically profiling everyone in a room for threat potential. I still carry the weight of 73 lives I took because someone told me to, and that weight doesn't get lighter just because I decided to stop killing. A woman in the second row, maybe 25, with scars on her forearms that Imani recognized from conditioning exercises, raised her hand. "So why should we try? If it doesn't get better, if the damage is permanent, why fight at all?" "Because," Imani said simply, "the alternative is worse. The alternative is spending the rest of your life as someone else's weapon, never knowing what you might have been if you'd chosen yourself instead. And I can't tell you that recovery is guaranteed, but I can tell you this. Every single person in this room has already proven they're capable of more than the organization believed possible. You survived their training. You survived their conditioning. You survived everything they did to break you. That survival is proof of strength they didn't give you, strength you had all along." Over the next 2 hours, she facilitated what would become a weekly session, group therapy for people who'd been taught that emotions were weaknesses and connections were liabilities. It was messy, painful. Several people walked out. One woman broke down crying and couldn't stop for 20 minutes. A man in the back row listed every person he'd killed, methodically, like reciting a grocery list, and when he finished, he said, "I remember all of them. Does that make me better or worse than someone who forgets?" "Neither," Imani told him gently. "It makes you human. And being human means carrying the weight of what we've done while trying to do better with what we do next." After the session, Dante was waiting outside the conference room with coffee and a croissant from the bakery he'd recently acquired, not for profit, but because the previous owner had been targeted by a protection racket, and Dante had decided that particular form of bullying offended him. He'd made the problem disappear and bought the business to make sure it stayed disappeared. "How'd it go?" he asked, handing her the coffee. "Hard."
Good.
"Some people are ready to start processing. Others aren't there yet. But they showed up, which is more than I expected." They walked through the building, a former school that Dante had purchased and converted into a rehabilitation center for ex-organization assets. It had classrooms for education, therapy offices, a gym, even apartments where people could live while they rebuilt their lives. Imani had named it the Phoenix House, because if you were going to rebuild yourself from ashes, you might as well own the metaphor. "I got a call from Agent Morrison this morning," Dante said as they walked. "The FBI task force finished processing the evidence from the hard drives. They've identified 47 organization facilities worldwide, arrested 136 handlers and support staff, and recovered files on nearly 600 trained assets. 600. Imani felt the number like a physical weight. That's twice what we estimated, which means our work just doubled. Morrison wants to know if you'd be willing to consult on deprogramming protocols, help them develop strategies for reaching people before they're activated for missions. Of course. She'd been working with law enforcement for months now, walking the delicate line between helping them dismantle a criminal network and protecting the victims who'd been forced to work for that network. But we need to be careful. The justice system isn't equipped to handle people like us. Half those assets are going to end up in prison or psychiatric facilities, and that's just another kind of cage. Then we build an alternative. Dante's voice carried the same certainty that had made him one of the most powerful crime bosses in the Northeast. The Phoenix House scales up. We create a network of rehabilitation centers, funded through my organization's legitimate businesses. We hire therapists who specialize in PTSD and cult deprogramming. We provide education, job training, legal support. We give people what the organization never did, actual choices about their futures. Imani stopped walking, turned to face him fully. You're talking about dismantling your criminal empire to fund rehabilitation for former assassins. I'm talking about putting my resources towards something that matters. He cupped her face gently. You changed my perspective, Imani. Made me realize that power without purpose is just waste. I'll always have enemies, will always need to protect my people and my territories. But I can do that while also building something better. Something that helps instead of just hurts. That's a very long road. It could take years, decades. Good thing I'm patient. He kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Besides, I like having projects. Keeps me from getting bored. They continued walking, discussing logistics and funding and the 1,000 details required to turn a vision into reality. As they talked, Imani felt something she'd rarely experienced, contentment. Not happiness, exactly, because happiness felt too simple for the complexity of what they were building. But contentment, purpose, the sense that her life was finally moving towards something instead of just away from something. Her phone buzzed. A text from one of the Phoenix House residents. Thank you for today. First time in 10 years I felt like maybe I'm not broken forever. She showed it to Dante, and his smile was soft, genuine. Worth it, he asked. Every minute. That evening, they had dinner in Dante's apartment. The mansion had been sold. Too many ghosts, too many memories of blood on marble floors. The new place was smaller, more secure, and notably lacking in grand foyers where assassinations could unfold. Lucia joined them, bringing files on 3 potential new Phoenix House locations and stories about her week spent tracking down former organization suppliers. They ate pasta and drank wine and talked about work like normal people discussing normal problems, except the problems were neutralizing international child trafficking networks and developing trauma-informed therapy protocols for combat-trained operatives. After dinner, after Lucia left, after the dishes were cleaned and the files were put away, Imani and Dante stood together on the balcony watching the city lights stretch to the horizon. Do you ever regret it? Dante asked quietly. Choosing to save me instead of completing your mission? Your life would be simpler if you'd just followed orders. Simpler, Imani agreed. But not better. Not worth living. She thought about that 11-year-old girl sleeping in a subway station, desperate and alone, and willing to trust anyone who offered safety. Thought about how that girl had been shaped and molded and broken down until she forgot what it meant to be human. And she thought about the woman she was now, still broken in places, still carrying scars that would never fully heal, but also free. Actually, genuinely free to make choices about her life, her future, her purpose. I spent 29 years being what other people made me, she said. The organization's weapon. The perfect operative. A tool in someone else's hands. And in one single moment, I became something else. I became mine. That choice cost me everything I thought I knew about myself and gave me back something more valuable, the chance to find out who I actually am. And? Dante asked. Who are you, Imani Webb? She considered the question seriously because after 3 decades of lies and programming, honesty felt like a radical act. I'm a survivor, she said finally. I'm someone with blood on her hands and holes in her heart who decided that neither of those things gets to define her future. I'm a woman who learned that the strongest weapon is choice, choosing mercy over programming, choosing connection over isolation, choosing to build instead of just destroy. I'm someone who found love in the last place I expected and decided it was worth fighting for. She turned to face him fully. And I'm someone who's going to spend the rest of her life trying to help other people find the same freedom I found. Not because it'll wash away the past, but because it's the only future worth having. Dante pulled her close, and they stood there as the city breathed around them. Millions of lives unfolding, millions of stories being written, and there's just one thread in the vast tapestry of human experience. I love you, he said simply, for who you were, who you are, and who you're becoming. I love you too, Imani replied, for seeing me when I was invisible, for choosing me when I was dangerous, and for building something beautiful with me out of all this broken glass. They stayed there until the night grew cold and the stars emerged from behind city light pollution. Two people who'd survived impossible odds, made terrible choices, and somehow found redemption in the simple act of choosing each other. The organization would never fully disappear. There would always be someone willing to exploit the vulnerable, to turn children into weapons, to build empires on suffering. But now there would also be people fighting back. Survivors helping survivors. Former victims becoming advocates. A network of people who understood that the strongest chains were the ones we wore in our minds, and the most powerful freedom was the choice to break them. 3 months became 6. 6 became a year. The Phoenix House expanded to 5 locations. Law enforcement dismantled 73 organization facilities. 400 former assets entered rehabilitation programs. News coverage educated the public about the invisible trade in human weapons. And through it all, Imani and Dante built something that looked almost like a normal life, or at least as normal as life gets when you're a reformed assassin and a reforming crime boss trying to make the world slightly less terrible than you found it. They had setbacks. Some residents relapsed into violence. Some assets couldn't be saved and had to be stopped permanently. Some nights, Imani still woke up screaming, still reached for weapons that weren't there, still felt the phantom weight of 73 ghosts. But she also had mornings where she woke up next to someone who loved her. Days spent helping people find hope in hopelessness. Evenings with Lucia and the Phoenix House staff, planning and laughing and being human together. Moments of unexpected joy that felt like miracles precisely because they were so ordinary. One morning, exactly 18 months after the night everything changed, Imani stood in front of a courtroom testifying against the last remaining high-level organization handler. The trial had taken months, involved testimony from dozens of survivors, and would likely result in multiple life sentences. When the prosecutor asked her why she'd chosen to testify instead of disappearing into witness protection, Imani looked directly at the defendant, a man who'd personally overseen her training, who'd watched her be broken down and rebuilt without a flicker of conscience, and spoke clearly. Because silence is how organizations like this survive. Silence is how they convinced us we were alone, that no one would believe us, that we had no choice but to comply. I'm testifying because every survivor deserves to know their voice matters, their story matters, their choice to break free matters. And I'm testifying because the best revenge against people who tried to make us invisible is to stand in the light and refuse to be erased. The defendant was convicted, sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms, led away in chains to a future that would end in prison walls and guards and regulations, his own kind of programming, his own kind of cage. Imani felt no satisfaction, just a quiet sense of completion, of one chapter ending and another beginning. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Dante was waiting with the car, and Lucia was running interference with reporters, but someone managed to shout a question that carried across the chaos. Ms. Webb, what would you say to other survivors who are still afraid to come forward? Imani paused, turned back, looked directly at the cameras. I'd say that fear is the last chain they put on you. And you don't have to break it all at once. You just have to test it. Pull against it. See if it's as strong as they told you it was. Because here's what I learned: the moment you choose yourself, even in the smallest way, everything changes. Not immediately, not easily, but gradually, in increments of courage that add up to freedom. She smiled then, genuine and warm. And I'd say you're not alone. That there are people like me, like all of us at the Phoenix House, who understand what you survived and who will fight beside you when you're ready to fight for yourself. The cage is real, but so is the key. And the key is choice. If you've made it this far, if you've stayed with Imani's story through all its darkness and hope, I need you to do something. I need you to subscribe to this channel and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like this, stories about people breaking free from the cages they were raised in, these stories matter. They change lives. They give hope to people who thought hope was impossible. So if this story meant something to you, if it made you feel something, if it reminded you that even the most broken among us can build something beautiful from the wreckage, share it. Let it reach the people who need it most. Because maybe somewhere out there, someone is waiting for permission to choose themselves. And maybe this story is that permission.
Subscribe. Share.
Be part of the message that says, you can break free, you can heal, and you are not alone. The car door closed. The city swallowed them. And Imani Webb, former weapon, current survivor, future advocate, drove toward whatever came next with the absolute certainty that she'd face it on her own terms. Because some chains were meant to be broken, and some people were worth becoming.